Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and that was a very sweet introduction from Phil. The last time I was in Cardiff in a professional capacity, I was a waitress at the St David's Hotel and Spa, so things have moved on a little for me since then, but it's very exciting to be back. Here we go. So I'm not going to labour too much about IDEO because I hope some of you are familiar with IDEO as a company and our work, but it's worth saying that I've been at IDEO now for around about 10 years, and really what we're in the business of doing is helping businesses to innovate using design thinking. Oh, look, it's on these as well. There you go. Using design thinking. And so historically, I think we're perhaps still most famous for our work in product design. We were the company that designed the first Apple mouse, for example. But increasingly over the years, we realised that the process that enabled us to design great iconic products actually applied itself equally to services. So in the case of the second example, you'll see that the Prada store in New York, we were able to add an awful lot of value to that product experience for customers by designing a great retail service that went around it with technology. And increasingly, we're kind of being asked to add those two things together. So what happens when you bring together product and service to create new experiences? So for example, this last example is the Department for Economic Development in Dubai, where businesses have to go and register for their business permit. And whilst I doubt that will ever be a truly delightful experience, if you think about the design of the environment, the staff roles, the touch points, the communication, the digital interactions, you can at least try and make something like that a bit more seamless. So that's really been our journey as a company. There are about 700 people working for IDEO in 12 global locations. And we have a pretty vast client portfolio. The interesting thing is we're now being asked to design anything from products and services through to digital interactions, experiences, brands, occasionally corporate strategy, and even more occasionally, but excitingly, every now and again, public policy. So there's pretty much no challenge that we're not prepared to use our process to take on in some way. And I think the interesting thing for us is the cross-pollination that we can achieve. So, for example, when we're going to work with a client like Ritz-Carlton, who's in the hospitality sector, serving luxury hotels, we might glean some insights into how it is a bank like UBS and its wealth management offer could do something better for its customers, like maybe not give them 80-page forms to fill out, as was explained in an earlier presentation. Or when we work with someone like IKEA, who are real masters of guiding you through a physical space and making you follow a particular logical path through their experience, perhaps that gives us some clues as to how we could maybe do triage a little bit better in an NHS hospital. So that's the way that we like to kind of operate across disciplines. So there are really two central tenets to design thinking, but I think I'm in the fortunate position here of kind of speaking to the choir. So I'm not going to labour too much on these, but the first is really that we always try to take a holistic approach to design, which is about triangulating three things: what people want, what makes something desirable, how we can bring that to life, how we're going to make it feasible, and how we're going to commercialise it. How is this going to be sustainable, viable? And I think what's interesting is we quite often getting clients coming to us from the kind of viability section saying, we found a great way to squeeze more profit out of this particular value chain, help us make people want it. Or we have people coming to us from the kind of manufacturing sector maybe saying, we've created this amazing new nanotechnology fibre, but we can't sell it to NASA, so help us think of another use case. And that's all very interesting, but we try and step that back and say, well, what do people actually want? What do they need? Let's start there, and then let's triangulate how we're going to make that into a commercially viable business and one that you can actually operationalise. So that's really the way around that we try and go there. I'm sorry I'm doing this at a breakneck pace, but I'm coming to the interesting bit, so I just wanted to lay the groundwork first. And then lastly, the second tenet is about prototyping, which I think we've already spoken of today in a number of different presentations. But basically, it's a way to take risk out, to learn faster, sometimes to fail faster, and then to succeed sooner. So whether you're trying to work out how Oxfam can get more donations from gift aid through the way that they ask donors to drop off their bags, or whether you're trying to actually kind of quieten down the noise at airports so that you can actually spot things in the security channel as they're going through, both of those things are things you could use a design process to try and prototype. But now onto the substance of what I wanted to talk to you today about and what Phil so kindly teed me up for, which is the idea of real-time service design. What was fascinating to me about this morning's presentations was a couple of the speakers spoke very eloquently about the need to bring together what we can learn from big data, quantitative research, numbers, analysis, with what we can learn from far more empathic techniques, more qualitative approaches, more ethnography, anthropological touches, user insight, that kind of thing. And absolutely, I'm all in favour of that 100%, but I do think there's a limitation to both those approaches, and that's that they're both research. And the fact is that when people know they're participating in research, they tend to behave slightly differently than when they're responding to something as though it's real. So what I want to discuss with you today is this notion of real-time service design. By which I mean, if your life as a service designer looks anything like mine, then it's roughly speaking a lot like this. A lot of sitting in people's houses, eating biscuits, drinking cups of tea and talking to them, going through their fridges, rifling around in their bathroom cabinets, having co-creation design sessions where you bring people together in groups, maybe doing the odd survey, having a look at some data that's coming back from users, and then taking your insights, your customer journeys, your personas, your profiles, and using that to guide things like your prototypes, down here in the bottom right-hand corner, which is a fantastic way of doing things. You get to wonderful insights, you get to really, really deep nuance, and often that nuance is the thing that makes someone's experience of a service so much more valuable. But I would contend that that process can be quite time-consuming, and it can become a bit of an academic exercise because people know they're taking part in a research session. They know they're being asked to participate as a respondent. And that does somewhat bias your results, whether that's quant or that's qual. That's just a fact of doing research. And there are ways you can mitigate that, but increasingly at IDEO, we've been watching how the other guys do it and sort of cross the other side of town, roundabout, Silicon roundabout, that area of things, the world's looking a bit more like this. You have people, customers, businesses, individuals, throwing up products on things like Kickstarter, opening up pop-ups in, retail, in food and beverage, in service, reading books like The Lean Startup, and just putting stuff out there, right? And it's pretty clear when you look at the kinds of stuff that's going up on Kickstarter that these people aren't doing like lengthy user evaluations to figure out what their value proposition is. They are not customer testing this to within an inch of its life. They're not modeling out their scenarios and their user journeys. They're just building it and seeing who will come. Sometimes I think they spend the most amount of time taking a commonly used word, removing the vowels, and then seeing if they can get a URL that hasn't been taken. That's where the investment is going. So what I'm curious to know is, if that's what these guys are doing in enterprise and in startup culture, they're learning real stuff in real time from real people. We are doing stuff through combined research techniques. So what I'd like to talk to you about and would love to get your thoughts on today is what happens when you kind of atom smash those two things together. What happens if you take the best principles and best practice that comes from our service design research, all that nuance, all that insight, all that deep customer empathy, and you smash that together with a startup mentality that says, build it fast, build it quick, build it cheap, and then see what you learn. Just launch to learn. What happens then? And that's really something that IDEO has been, IDEO has been trying to sort of pioneer in recent years, is what does real-time service design look like? And I'm going to have to give props to my dad here, because he actually said this to me in about 1998, I think, and I still don't think there's a better or more succinct way of putting it. He's a designer in a slightly different field, and he said to me, there's no virtual substitute for an actual experience. And to me, that's what real-time services design is all about. It's about creating an actual experience, perceived, understood as real, and understanding what you learn from that. Okay, so what do we actually mean by that? What is it? Basically, it's about setting up some kind of experiment, some kind of experience, some kind of thing that people think is real, and asking them to respond to it in that way so that they're not research participants, they're actually people using or responding to this service. And that way you can judge their actual reactions, their actual responses, and crucially, their actual behaviors in real-life contexts. It's also about putting your ideas out there in quite limited ways and observing and measuring how people respond to them. And crucially, this to me is the really important part, and the bit where researchers always struggle to kind of reconcile itself, is you can start to understand the difference between what people say, what people think, what people feel, and what they do. And it's always the what they do part that is where we tend to come unstuck if we stick to our traditional approaches. Why is it important? Well, again, 3 reasons, I think. Any idea that you have for a new product, for a new service, for a new venture is based on a series of assumptions. So if you can surface those assumptions and if you can test them out in a real world way so that people are responding to this as if it's an actual entity for them to interact with, then you can actually start to turn from what we believe about something to what we know about something. And obviously, once you've moved from we believe to we know, then you've taken a whole ton of risk out of the innovation process. So, what are some principles of real-time service design? I'd like to walk you through 4 examples. I'm unashamedly using IDEO examples, but of course there are millions out there from other companies and other sectors, but these happen to be the 4 I know quite well. So hopefully you'll forgive me for having done a little bit of, sort of dressing my own shop window, as it were. So the first one is, don't be scared to get started. This is a great phrase. You can always fake it until you make it. So what do I mean by that? Way back when, IDEO.org, which is the not-for-profit arm of IDEO that works on bottom of the pyramid challenges in the developing world, was working with 2 NGOs and Unilever trying to figure out a service proposition around processed, purified, cleaned water. And the first question that these partners all had was about, well, if we created a service about giving people clean bottled water, would we want to make that proposition all to do with kind of household utility tasks like keeping homes germ-free, hygienic and clean, for which you obviously need water? Or would we want to focus on kind of nutritional well-being health benefits like nutritional supplements and things like that, which obviously you also need drinking water to do? They had no idea. They've realized the proposition could go either way, didn't know which way to spin it. They also had a number of different models for how they thought this service could work in practice. So one idea was, should we have retail shops? Should we have kiosks where we sell this drinking water and we sell other products that augment it? Should we have, now I'm going to really butcher the Swahili language here, I believe it's an Mbokoteni, which is a water cart that delivers this service to your house. This is one of our designers, Robin here. You'll note the brilliant look of incredulity from the people that are staring at him as he drags that past. 6'4" Italian male wandering through a slum in Nairobi. Or should we have a subscription service? Didn't know the answer to any of these questions, both what the value proposition should be or how the service should be delivered. Now, in a traditional approach, perhaps if we just stuck to kind of qual and quant, we could have tested this in a number of different formats. But rather boldly, the team decided to go for something completely different and faked an entire brand and service. They took over a small shop, generous use of the term, here in Nairobi, and they created an entirely fake brand, Smart Life. They got some local guys in to run the shop because it soon became apparent that a 6'4" Italian man isn't very credible selling water to people in the central of slums in Nairobi. They did things like they created iron-on transfers for their t-shirts. They set up, they bought their products in and repackaged them in fake packaging. They wrote scripts for the people that should work in the kiosk. They went the whole 9 yards to make this seem as though it was a genuine service, a genuine product that they were offering people. And actually, rather boldly, on the first day, they decided to launch all 3 versions of their mechanism at once. So they had the kiosk running, they also did a subscription service door-to-door, and they did the delivery service. You'll be remembered, here he is, dragging water around Nairobi. So what was fascinating about this was they did this experiment for 2 weeks, which I think most of us know if you go and do sort of qual and quant user research, 2 weeks is a fairly tight time frame to pull that together. And what was fascinating is that not only did they, in that time, answer questions about the service, so for example, they learned in the end that a door-to-door subscription was the best model. They learned that this needed to be a female-focused brand because it tended to be women that bought into the value proposition. They learned that you could situate germ and hygiene products alongside nutritional and well-being products. They learned that the brand Smart Life was brilliant, even with a white background, even though the t-shirts of everyone lugging these jerry cans around got filthy. They learned all of this, but in the same time, they actually sold 520 litres of clean drinking water during the experiment. So not only had they kind of faked this whole thing and made it real, they now had not just a kind of working business model in Excel, they had a blueprint for what the service model should be. They had a scalable data on exactly what it would take to operationalize this, what the costs of running the service would be, even down to who you need to hire to run your shops and what kind of pay packet they need to be on. They figured out that you needed to run this service at weekends because that's when the heads of the household were home, and it shouldn't be a sort of 9-to-5 weekday business. And so what I'm saying, from having faked it, pretended all along this was real, they didn't just come back with a kind of yes or no on the value proposition. They had insight around what the value proposition should be, what the business model should be, what the user experience should be, and what the organizational capability was required to deliver it. That's just from faking it. They went from a fake thing to basically a beta version of the service in 2 weeks. So that was a really great example. The next one I want to talk about, I'll go a little bit quicker, is this idea about testing one key question at a time. and you come up with a concept or a new service or something, there's probably one question or a hypothesis you have which you need to unlock and answer first in order to proceed. But the problem is, if you kind of lump that all together with a load of other things, you end up with babies getting thrown out with bathwater. And to explain what I mean by that, I can't tell you how many user sessions I've sat in where I've put a sketch or a scenario in front of somebody and asked them what they think of this new idea, and try as I might, they come back with, see, I don't like blue. And you've picked a blue logo, and I'm just not a blue person. And I say, well, okay, leaving aside the logo, what do you think about this idea of this fantastic new service? And they're like, could it not be pink? And you just think, okay, this is the problem. So how can you regress to answer just that one critical question that unlocks the problem that you're trying to solve? Let me give you an example of how we've been doing this at IDEO. A few years ago, we wanted to set up a platform which is now established and running. Some of you may know it, called Open IDEO. The idea behind this is a website where people can participate in the design process remotely, following the structure of our traditional design process, but online. Anyone can take part, and the focus of this tends to be more social challenges. So whereas our consultancy work might be helping design a new product for P&G, Open IDEO is all about social challenges. So the first question we had, that was nothing to do with anything else, was, okay, IDEO as a brand has a reputation that means we can talk about design and technology, but do we have permission to talk about what those things could do for something like climate change or maternal health in developing countries? Can we convene those kind of conversations? Are we even credible? How did we answer that? We set up a Facebook page. We called it Big Conversations and Small Talk. Now, the main advantage of doing that is if we'd have just gone and built a beta version of the site, we'd have had to get a ton of investment to set that up. It would have taken a long time to build, and we had no proof of concept. We still didn't know if people even thought we could convene this. By putting this out there on Facebook, we knew the marketing was taken care of. We knew lots of people would see it. We didn't have a kick ourselves that we didn't get eyeballs on it. And also we knew that if people didn't like the layout or the design or whatever, that wasn't our problem, that was Facebook's. So the only thing we were testing here is if IDEO instigates a conversation, will a community form around it? And the exciting news for us was that yes, actually about 1,000 people ended up liking this page, and several hundred threaded conversations took place on topics that we instigated, like how will technology change medicine? And so everything else was kind of regressful. Nobody objected to the house style, that was Facebook. Nobody said, but you didn't market it properly, loads of people saw it, it was on Facebook. We just got the answer to that one question, and it allowed us to go on and build Open IDEO. I'm rapidly running out of time, so I'm gonna just skip on to this last one. Actually, it's the penultimate one, sorry, the last one might have to fall by the wayside. Third thing that I wanted to talk to you about is if you want to expand your toolkit and do this real-time service design, just borrow somebody else's tools. Don't go and invent stuff yourself. Don't be writing lines of code. You don't need to. So here's a really simple example. We were working with a health and well-being company in the US to design some new propositions, new products. And usually if we were doing that, we'd make lovely illustrations and really high fidelity renders, and we'd print them out on boards, and we'd go and sit down and talk to people in user sessions. Or you could work with an agency that specializes in this. In this case, we work with a company called Dobango, and get them to find some really key influencers for you on Pinterest. Put out your concepts as real concepts, have those people on Pinterest put them up on your board, and then figure out where your clicks go. Who's repinning them? Who's liking them? Who's clicking through to the dummy website that's behind them? How many comments are you getting about them? All perceived as real. This is a complete test. No sense that this is research material at all. Second example, which I really like, is we worked for what on paper could have been quite a unsexy company. They are a buildings supplier who serve the B2B market, making walls. And they wanted to know if they had a proposition they could take to customers. Could they have a B2C offering so that people, when they were thinking about their walls, as I know we all do, said, I would like their product, definitely their product. And the key question they had to unlock to start with is, well, do people think about walls in their specific room of their house, like they think kitchen walls or playroom walls, or do they think about an issue with their walls? So, heat insulation, weak plaster, etc., etc. Quickest way to find this out was simply to build 2 brand propositions and launch them as websites. So here you'll see our very sexy Rushcliffe brand, which was all about thinking about the rooms in your house and what you use them for and how walls could help you there. And then you see the slightly more kind of, does what it says on the tin, Thirsk brand, which was a website that was all about what's the issue with your wall, and here's a product that we propose could help you. What was really fascinating about this was within, I think, 2 or 3 weeks that this experiment ran, sorry, just to say, we built these sites on WordPress, and then we did a whole load of Google AdWords campaigns to drive traffic to these sites. So we bought a whole load of different AdWords to see who will land, who will click through. Here's what we learned in 2 weeks. Firstly, that the proposition that was all around problem solving, not the one that's like, what do you think about your kitchen walls, but the one that was like, have you got weak plaster? Do you need a solution? That one, hands down. That's the way that customers think about walls. But not only that, specifically noise insulation, soundproofing. We did this Google AdWords campaign. You can just see it there. Is your home too loud? Crikey, I'm out of time. Sorry, 2 more seconds. Thin walls, noisy neighbors, learn about quieter homes here. That particular AdWord and the related searches generated 51,000 page impressions in the duration of this experiment, compared to the next load of AdWords, which was 15,000. So that told us not only that there was massive appetite and the proposition needed to be around soundproofing and very practical, but also we could begin to quantify it. It was the single biggest issue. It was exponentially more important to anyone else than the next topic, which might have been weak plaster or whatever it was. So I'm very conscious of the amount of time. I didn't even get time to tell you all about embracing serendipity, but if I had, you'd have seen all of these sexy pictures about what we did in Singapore with traditional Chinese medicine. What I basically wanted to leave you with was these 4 ideas. And my conclusion actually is simply, and the question I'd like to put to you is, all of this is all well and good, but surprisingly, despite the value it adds, despite the fact it's relatively low cost, despite the fact it gets around the kind of research subject divide, despite the fact it's real, clients are pretty reticent to try these approaches. So one thing I would give you as my final piece of advice, and you didn't hear it from me, is just do this stuff on the DL. Do it on the down low. It costs very little to do a fake website and a Google AdWords search. See what you learn and then tell your clients how valuable it was. Then tell your partners. Don't wait for permission because you're not going to get it. This scares the bejesus out of people. Just start, see what you learn, and I'd love to hear your feedback at the end of it. So, diolch yn fawr. Thank you for your time. Look forward to hearing more.